Some houses keep the warmth of their past owners. Others keep their sins. There are places built not for comfort but for concealment, where the walls are thicker, not to keep the cold out, but to keep something in. And sometimes, when those walls are disturbed, the silence they've kept for decades bleeds into the present. Hi everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. Hit subscribe and tap the bell icon before this story pulls you in too deep. It began with a man named Thomas, who had recently purchased an old farmhouse on the edge of town. It was the kind of property real estate agents call full of charm, but the locals simply called forgotten. The paint peeled in long, curling strips. The floorboards complained with every step. And yet, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that something about this place was watching him. Weeks after moving in, he decided to renovate the basement. Pulling down the warped paneling, he noticed a narrow seam in the wall, so thin it could have been mistaken for a flaw in the wood. But it wasn't. It was a door, locked from the outside. The lock was rusted, stubborn, like it hadn't been touched in decades. Thomas broke it with a hammer. Behind it was a crawl space, no bigger than a closet, the air stale and biting, thick with the smell of metal and dust. There was no light, but there were shapes. At first, he thought they were sacks or bundles. But when his flashlight flickered across them, he saw faces. Not living ones, pale, waxen, distorted in ways that made the mind recoil. They looked human enough from a distance, but up close, their eyes were too far apart, their jaws set wrong, as if whoever made them had never seen a person, only heard a description. In the corner of the small room sat an old wooden trunk, its surface blackened with age. The trunk was padlocked, but on its lid was a single photograph, curling at the edie. Jazz, a family, posed stiffly in black and white. Every one of them wore the same uneven, lopsided smile, and the same strange, far-apart eyes. It was then Thomas realized the walls hadn't been built to hide something from intruders. They'd been built to hide something from the house itself. Thomas didn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, the image of that family photograph returned. Their faces, frozen in time, carrying an expression that wasn't joy, wasn't sorrow, but something in between, as if they knew something they'd never say aloud. In the morning, he went back down to the hidden room, this time armed with gloves, a crowbar, and a growing sense of dread. The padlock on the trunk looked fragile, but it took several strikes to break it. Inside, he found layers of folded cloth, brittle with age. When he unwrapped them, he discovered journals, thick, leather-bound, their pages yellowed and spotted. The handwriting was cramped and uneven, written in a mix of English and an older, almost biblical form of script. The first few entries were mundane, weather notes, crop yields, town gossip. But soon, the tone shifted. The author spoke of the children, but never named them. They were described in the most peculiar way. They were not born of sin, but of secrecy. They are ours, but not like us. One passage chilled him more than the rest. We keep them in the room so they cannot wander. Their eyes see too much. Their mouths speak things they could not know. Thomas flipped through faster now, scanning entry after entry. The writer described how the family had taken in outsiders, children left at their doorstep over the years. But each of these children, according to the journals, changed after a few weeks. Their features would shift, subtly at first, then drastically. There was also mention of a calling, something that lured these children to the woods behind the property, to a place referred to only as the Hollow. The writer seemed terrified of it, yet resigned to its existence. We do not speak of the Hollow. We do not follow the children there. We wait for them to return, and when they do, we lock the door. By the time Thomas closed the journal, the air in the basement felt heavier. He realized he was holding his breath. It was no longer just an old farmhouse to him. It was a tomb of secrets, each brick laid to seal away something the family feared, and now he had opened it. That night, Thomas sat in his living room, the journals stacked on the table before him like a pile of forbidden relics. Outside, the wind howled against the window panes, but beneath it, he swore he could hear something softer. A tapping, almost like knuckles brushing the glass. He told himself it was just the branches in the storm, but it didn't stop. Unable to focus on the sound, he picked up one of the later journals. The entries had grown frantic, the handwriting slanting wildly as though the writer had been shaking while putting pen to paper. "We hear them whisper at night," one page read. "The words are not in our tongue, yet we know them. The sound passes through the walls like water through earth." Thomas leaned closer to the faded ink, tracing the lines with his eyes. The next entry was dated exactly 100 years before that night. It told of a winter when the family had taken in a boy no older than 6. His name was never written, just he. The writer described the boy as eerily quiet, always watching, his eyes too wide for his face. After a month, the boy began standing at the foot of the family's beds at night. He would whisper in their dreams, telling them things that hadn't yet happened. Deaths, accidents, fires. When they tried to question him, the boy would laugh in a voice that didn't sound like his own. The journal claimed that one night, he disappeared. They found him 2 days later, deep in the hollow, speaking to something none of them could see. After that, they never let him outside again. Thomas shivered. His own farmhouse backed up to thick woodland. And though he'd never gone far into it, he suddenly remembered the unnatural silence there. No birdsong, no rustle of animals, only stillness. Another journal entry caught his attention. "They are not ours to keep, but ours to guard. If the hollow calls again, and no one answers, it will come for all of us." The words felt heavier than paper should allow. A sudden, sharp bang echoed from somewhere inside the house. Not from the storm outside, but from below. The basement. Thomas's heart began to pound. The secret room's door had been closed when he left it earlier. But now, it sounded like something was on the other side. Thomas froze, straining to hear through the pounding of his own heartbeat. The noise came again. 3 slow knocks from beneath his feet, deliberate and spaced apart. It was the kind of sound that felt less like a request to enter, and more like a reminder that something was already inside. Grabbing the flashlight from the mantel, he descended the narrow staircase into the basement. The air grew colder with each step, his breath clouding faintly in the beam of light. The smell hit him before the floor did, damp earth, tinged with something metallic. He swept the light across the room, its pale glow sliding over stacked firewood, rusting tools, and that heavy oak door in the far wall. It was open 2 inches. He had been certain he closed it earlier. Now, in the thin crack of darkness, the beam of his flashlight seemed to vanish, as if the space beyond absorbed light instead of reflecting it. Thomas pushed it open further. The temperature dropped sharply, the musty scent giving way to something sweet and rotting. The secret room wasn't just a room. It was a tunnel. The earthen walls curved away into a narrow passage, disappearing into blackness. The floor was marked with footprints, small, bare, and far too many to count. And then, a voice. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even close. But it was clear. A child's voice, calling softly, "Come see." Thomas's stomach knotted. The voice was wrong. It had the hollow echo of someone speaking into a well, layered with something else beneath it. A faint rumble, almost like many voices speaking the same words together. He should have turned and run. He knew that. But something in the tone, some deep compulsion, pulled him forward. The dirt crunched under his boots as he stepped inside. The tunnel walls seemed to draw tighter around him, the air thick and oppressive. A few feet in, his flashlight flickered. throwing distort. Ted's shadows across the packed earth. For a split second he saw them, faces pressed into the tunnel walls, eyes closed, mouths open in silent screams. The image vanished when the beam steadied, leaving only smooth dirt. But the voice came again, louder this time. "Come see!" Behind him, the door creaked shut. The slam of the oak door behind him should have jolted Thomas into action, but instead, it seemed to seal him inside some suspended moment where time had no meaning. His breaths came shallow, every sound amplified, the scrape of dirt under his boots, the low groan of the tunnel settling above him, the soft whisper of that impossible voice ahead. The deeper he went, the more wrong the space began to feel. The tunnel angled downward, but the air grew heavier, thicker, as though it were pushing against him. His flashlight caught strange details, crude etchings carved into the dirt walls, jagged lines forming symbols that seemed to move when he wasn't looking directly at them. Halfway down, his foot struck something. He pointed the light down and froze. It was a shoe. Small, made of worn leather, its stitching frayed, the style decades out of fashion. The leather was still supple. Too supple. He set it back down, meaning to keep moving, but the ground ahead shifted. Something was moving beneath the dirt, a slow ripple like a snake sliding just under the surface. Then, from the wall to his left, a pale hand emerged. The fingers were thin, far too long, curling in slow invitation. Thomas stumbled back, the flashlight beam slicing through the dark. More hands began pushing through the walls, not breaking the dirt apart, but slipping through it as though it were water. Their skin was gray and bruised, nails long and jagged. Some reached for him. Some merely hovered, trembling, as though straining toward the light. He turned to run, but the tunnel behind him was gone. Where there had been an open passage, now there was only packed earth, smooth and undisturbed, as if no one had ever dug it. The voice returned, this time all around him. "You live in our home now." The ground shifted again, this time beneath his feet. Thomas felt himself sink an inch, then another, and soil seemed to soften, pulling at his boots. In the unsteady beam of his flashlight, faces began to surface in the dirt at his feet, eyes rolling upward, mouths gaping wide as though to speak. But no sound came from them. Only the voice. Always the voice. Deeper. Thomas could no longer tell if he was walking or being dragged. The soil shifted under him in ways that didn't obey gravity, pulling him forward without his consent. Each step sank deeper, the ground swallowing his feet up to the ankle, then releasing, forcing him onward. The flashlight trembled in his hands, its beam flickering, threatening to die entirely. The tunnel opened into a cavern, a space so large his light couldn't find its end. The air was colder here, laced with the damp, metallic tang of blood. Shapes moved in the distance, their shuffling forms just beyond clarity. He heard breathing, dozens of separate breaths, slow and in perfect unison, like one great lung exhaling from many mouths. As his light swept over the cavern floor, it caught on mounds of something pale. Not rocks, not bones. Bodies. All arranged in strange concentric circles, each facing inward toward a central pit. Their skin was paper thin, stretched tight over skulls that looked slightly wrong, too long, too narrow. Thomas realized with a shudder that none of them were decayed. They were preserved, their eyes open, lips moving in soundless words. From the pit came a sound, wet, rhythmic, as though something vast and alive was breathing just below the surface. And then, slowly, it began to rise. It wasn't a person. It wasn't even one shape. It was many faces pressed together, forming a shifting mass, their eyes rolling, their mouths overlapping. They whispered in voices that merged into a single word. Welcome. The mound of faces twisted toward Thomas, and a shiver went through the cavern. The breathing forms on the ground began to sit up in perfect sync, their heads turning toward him. Their faces were all similar, too similar, as if copied from the same original, stretched and warped over generations. Somewhere deep in his mind, Thomas understood. This was the house's true foe, undation. Not stone, not wood, but them. They had always been here, and now they had found him. The voice in his head became a command. Take your place. The ground beneath him cracked, revealing the same dark soil from the tunnel, crawling with pale, questing hands. The hands closed around Thomas's ankles, cold and slick, like something pulled from the bottom of a river. He kicked wildly, the beam of his flashlight slicing across the cavern and catching glimpses of faces. Not just in the pit, not just on the ground, but pressed into the very walls themselves. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Their eyes blinked in slow unison, tracking him wherever he moved. The voices grew louder, no longer whispers but chants, layered and endless. Each syllable felt older than language, a vibration in his bones rather than something he heard. The walls seemed to pulse with the rhythm, a living thing disguised as stone. Thomas dropped the flashlight. It rolled, casting long, stuttering shadows that danced grotesquely over the mounds of preserved bodies. The circle in the center yawned wider, and from its depths, a spine-like column began to emerge. Not bone, but interlocked human torsos, their mouths open in silent screams. A figure stepped forward from the crowd of sitters. It was tall, dressed in tattered funeral clothes, the fabric eaten away by time. Its face was not one face, but a collage of many, eyes mismatched, mouths overlapping, all moving independently. When it spoke, every mouth formed the same words. You were never meant to find this room, but the room has always meant to find you. The hands pulled harder. His knees sank into the soil, then his hips, then his chest. Panic roared in his head, but above it, something else. A strange calm, almost like acceptance. The more he fought, the tighter they held him. The more he stilled, the more they welcomed him. Around him, the other bodies began to hum, their mouths vibrating with the same low, resonant note. The sound seemed to come from the earth itself. The figure leaned close. Your name will be ours. Your face will be ours. The house will remember. The soil swallowed him, up to his neck. His last breath drew in the smell of dust, rot, and something sweet, like flowers left too long on a grave. The last thing he saw before the dark closed in was the flashlight's beam falling on the walls, and for the briefest moment, he saw his own face among them, already waiting. Every story leaves a scar. Drop yours in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Something is always listening.